Why are so many women abandoning relationships with men and taking up social justice causes? Why has this become their religion? The spiritual state of women on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 135. And today, we're going to look at the spiritual state of women in the year 2026. And you may be asking, why are two men talking about women, their spiritual state? Well, it's because we're seeing a lot of strange things going on in our world with women. And so we're just going to take it from, again, this biblical perspective. And we're going to ask the question, why are so many women abandoning relationships with men? And they seem to be taking up these social justice causes. Why has this become their religion? So I'm Pastor Keith, he's Pastor Brandon, two men. We're going to talk about the spiritual state of women in 2026. So Pastor Brandon, how are you as we start?
Doing pretty well for the most part.
You got your Steelers hat on, you're looking good.
They did make the playoffs. They just lost the first game.
Yeah, that's true. Because they have Rodgers as their quarterback, and the Vikings are trying to get him. But okay, let's dive into the spirit. Go ahead. What?
I didn't know that. I mean, I know Mike McCarthy and Rodgers were together at Green Bay, so I thought maybe he might come back for another year because of that.
You know, they're talking about that. I heard that he's the next Steelers coach, so yeah, he'd stay. No, the Vikings are actually trying to get the kid from Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
Because J.J. McCarthy is not cutting the mustard. But I digress, because we're two men talking about women. And we're talking sports, which is what guys do. So let me ask you this question. Are you ready?
Okay.
You don't look ready. Let me see.
I'm ready.
Oh, yeah, I guess you're ready. Why are so many women, do you think, abandoning their relationships with men and taking up these social justice causes like we see in Minneapolis? It's a lot of women blowing the whistles, honking their horns. And, we had Renee Good putting her life on the line. Why do you think that's happening? Or has it always happened? Or is it something that's just a new phenomenon?
Well, I mean, it definitely is something that from really the garden, there's it was the woman who was deceived. Adam has full responsibility. He has full responsibility for the sin that was committed in the garden, but it was the woman who was deceived. And, and I think that there is for whatever reason, because of how God has made them to nurture, I think they have a tendency to believe things that are deceptive, whereas men, because of how we're wired, have a tendency to be more logical about it. And so I don't know if logical is the right word, but there is a difference in how we perceive. And I think it has to do with that nurturing instinct that the Lord has given them.
So I guess the world would consider this foolishness talk, right? Because there's no difference between men and women. But we know from the Bible and in Scripture that they are wired different, and that's for a reason, right? There's a purpose for that.
Yes, and I would say that purpose, going back to Genesis 1:26 through 28, the idea that God created them in His own image, and He created them male and female, and Genesis 2, we see that God created her out of the side of Adam, so that she would be one corresponding to him. She would be one who completes him. And I think that's the way God has designed the woman, is to be the helpmate. And a lot of women nowadays for sure stumble on that because they want to be more than that. They think that they want to go out and get a job, get an education, get a job, and be more than just a helper suitable to their husband. And many of them now, they're foregoing getting pregnant, they're having children, and they're focusing on career, and are getting a dog instead of, or a cat instead of, or a bunch of dogs or a bunch of cats, and instead of getting a husband and having children. And so it, again, I think there's that nurturing instinct that is there, even though they deny it, even though they they suppress it, it's still there, and they still want to be nurturing. And so I think that's what leads them down these roads of social justice, because they have that nurturing, the instinct that they have. It also leads them to be 45, 50-year-old cat ladies too.
So we would agree that when a woman is more wired for, I guess the word empathy is the word that everyone uses, more than men. So what is the difference between like empathy and love? Is there a difference? Is empathy sort of an offshoot of love, or how would you define it?
Well, yeah, I mean, empathy is basically the idea that putting yourself in that place. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of the difference between sympathy and empathy. But, the problem is it's misplaced, because that empathy is misplaced because they're not seeing, they're being deceived. There's a deception that makes them think that, that it really, we've talked about it a lot. Love and truth go hand in hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you start divorcing the idea of love with truth, then you can get into this empathetic mode where you have empathy for those who you feel are being oppressed. Well, the problem is that, why are they in that position? And, as an example with immigration, I mean, we're seeing all these ladies, line up and protest in these situations. And, Renee Good was an example. And, I think this empathy leads them to overlook that people have broken the law, right? I mean, ICE is going after these people not because they just want to, kill all foreigners or get rid of all the foreigners. That's not the issue. As a matter of fact, it's pretty clear that they're just going after the worst of the worst. They're not going after just everybody. And they're going after those who have a criminal history and, are problematic that have shown to be problematic in our society. And so, by and large, and I know there's exceptions to everything, and the left has brought up exceptions to everything, but all these things, but by and large, they're not going after just regular Joes that are trying to make a living, and even if they're here illegally. And so, but women tend to take those causes up. They tend to forget that actually the reason why they're in that position is because they've broken the law. And I think we can see it too. And, there's a large amount, I don't know the percentages or anything, but a lot of guys that are on death row, women actually marry them. Like they will write them, and they will develop a relationship with the men on death row, and eventually, they build a relationship, and many of them marry those people on death row. And it's like it's empathy that's taken too far.
Yeah, it's like serial killers, like Bundy. He had tons of marriage proposals.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do remember that.
So you mentioned it, what's going on in Minneapolis, and so I want to go there, but I also want to like unpack this more and kind of try to figure out where all this began. Like you said, the Garden of Eden is really where it began, but as we look back in the last 50 years, we know that more women are now going to college and university than men. So how much can we blame kind of what colleges are doing? The way they're very leftist right now. And so they're teaching all this stuff is bad and we need to protest this. Protests have always been a part of, in the last 50 years for sure. But then in the year 2020, things kind of ramped up with Black Lives Matters. So I wonder if, like, I'm just going to ask you that question. How much do you think that like higher education has to do with this? Because a lot of these women are college graduates, and they're out protesting. This has become what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big part of it, Keith. That they women, what's happening is, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but they are in high school and they have fathers and mothers and those around them that are encouraging them to go further with their education. And it's interesting because the education system is wired more for women to succeed. I mean, men can struggle because most men don't want to sit in nice, neat rows and listen to a professor for an hour, right? I mean, most men want to be up and moving and doing things with their hands and, using their minds and actually accomplishing things. And I mean, and women are more wired the other way. And so when you put that together where people are encouraging women to go to college, and the problem with, one of the problems with going to college is that you're offsetting, you're pushing out getting married. Like, you're not going to get married till you get your education. Well, then when you get your education, well, I can't get married until, I get established. And, once you get established, well, then maybe I can get married, my mid to late 20s, but then I need to hold off having kids because we're still trying to build a career and we need two incomes in order to survive. And, and so you end up pushing that childbearing off. But if women are actually wired for childbearing, for nurturing in that way, then that has to come out in some other way. And so I think the connection between college education and what we're talking about is that, and these women, instead of being shown that it's actually superior, it's actually the greater thing is to have a family and to raise a family. That's the greater work. That's the greater job. Our culture is pushing them the other direction. And sadly, we see that in the church. Like I constantly see that where, fathers and mothers will, they want their kids to get education. They don't want them to get married until after they have their education. And so, and I get it in one sense because, I mean, you want your kids to succeed, but I think we need more parents that are saying, look, if you get married and have kids and, have a family and raise a family, that's success. That's what success should be. You don't have to have a college education. You don't have to have a career in order to have self-worth.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the most noble professions in the world, is just being a stay-home mom, because it's a really hard job. They don't get a lot of kudos from that, but they will in the end. They're as they grow old, their children will love them and cherish them. And if you don't have kids and you grow old, you become kind of bitter. So, and we see a lot of, I guess they call them Karens, out in the world that are just always looking for some kind of fight. Let me ask you this, and we know that, okay, we just talked about college, and I think when you have this, I use the word I think a lot, which I shouldn't, but I am thinking. But what I was trying to say is that I think what they did is, I don't know when this started, maybe in the 50s or 60s, for sure after the 60s, is that colleges began teaching that America is a colonial power that has taken over land from people and pushed them out. And so the white colonial people are bad and everybody else is good. And that's been going on for a long time. And so now you have all these young women. Now they're taking women's studies. I have no idea what those classes are like, but they are inundated with this: white men bad, white people are bad, and they took over the land. Got to give the land back to the Native Americans, and all these minorities they're the good people, we're the bad people. So I mean, I think it kind of brainwashes them a little bit, and they go out and they do all this stuff. But I just want to ask you this too: are the news headlines that we see, let's say all these news headlines, are they designed to pull at empathy rather than truth? Like, it seems like, to me, that's what they're trying to do, which causes more riots.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure, the media, the mainstream media, I mean, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, I guess they still exist, but some of those have been changed. But basically the mainstream liberal media is definitely they're reporting in such a way that it inflames the situation, and they know how to pull at the heartstrings. They know how to. I mentioned earlier that the Trump administration is mainly going after people who are they're bad people, and there was one that was a gang member. It was several months ago. It was a gang member. I can't remember his name now, but the Trump administration, they wanted to deport him because he was a gang member, and the mainstream media pumped up that he was a family man and wasn't doing any of those things, and that the Trump administration was making all this up, and they were focusing on how good a guy he is. And so they, whether or not that was true in that particular situation, I think it ultimately came out that he was a gang member, and he was a bad guy. But whether or not that's true, they automatically jump on sort of the humanity part of it, and to stoke up that empathy among people. And I think that's what as Christians, we can be very susceptible to that, because we don't want to be guilty of. I don't want to be guilty of like hurting someone. I don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't care, doesn't love. But and so when people say, well, you're unloving because you are okay with people being deported. Well, I'm okay with criminals being deported, absolutely, right? I'm definitely okay with that. I think it's a good thing, because they're not obeying the law, and they need to obey the law. They need to be expected to obey the law. And so if they want to be here, they're in our house, and they need to treat it the way it needs to be treated. And I don't think that's unloving, right? But I can be accused of being unloving because, I don't want to love the foreigner, so in terms of, like a biblical understanding. So, yeah.
Well, I think truth is vital. I think that's what the news should be doing, is giving the facts and not trying to influence people. And if this is what I struggle with, because my wife has lost a lot of friends over what's going on in Minneapolis, and these are women, right? They're on Facebook, and I guess they unfriend you or something, defriend you. I'm not on Facebook, but that's what they do. And Jenny said she lost 2 more yesterday over what's going on. And so what we see is that our view is what you just said. You just kind of summarized it, right? These are illegal immigrants who have come here. They've committed a crime, or they've committed a crime from where they came from. We're deporting them, right? We're arresting them. We're sending them back. They see it as this is Nazi Germany in 1930s. They're taking just law-abiding citizens from their homes, and this is the ridiculous part, but they believe they're sending them to concentration camps. Some even think they're sending them to ovens, and killing them, which I don't have any idea where all this stuff is coming from, but I think it's because Governor Walz in Minnesota said that these young children are like Anne Frank, they're going to grow up and they're going to be so there's always these comparisons, and I would understand if I didn't know the truth and I thought this was the Gestapo and they're just picking people off the street. I'd be upset too, but that's not the truth. That's not the fact. And I don't know if women just get so caught up in some of the lies and some of the untruths that are spread. Like, we were just talking about Renee Good, right? When it first happened, she was supposedly this mom dropping off her son. She was trying to make a U-turn in the middle of the road, and they just shot her in the head. That was kind of what they laid out there. Then the more you dig, the more you find out she's part of an organization that she's been trained to go out and get in the way and interfere with these guys. The same thing with the Preddy guy. The same thing. Like, he was just a nurse. He was there protecting another woman, and they shot him 6 times. It would make me mad.
Yeah.
And I'm not a woman.
Yeah, for sure. And as Christians, we should be sorrowful over the fact that Renee lost her life. Like,
absolutely.
I should be sorrowful over that. But at the same time, I can understand the truth of, she shouldn't have been doing what she was doing, right? And what she was doing led to that result. And, had she, and not to sound like a male chauvinist pig, but had she been at home taking care of her kid, that wouldn't have happened, right? And that it would have been nothing that happened would have happened. And so So yeah, I do think that women have definitely been affected by mainstream media and this social justice movement. They have been inordinately affected that way.
Which leads me to, I know you sent me yesterday this Canadian birth rate chart, which was kind of shocking. And I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit, because I think this is amazing and this is Canada. So, I mean, it probably is similar here, maybe not identical, but similar, where young women are not having babies even up until maybe they're 40. So anyway, like you just said, if they had families, how many of these people would actually have time to go out and protest? But they don't have families. So I just want you to touch on the Canadian birth rate.
Yeah, I can't remember. I was trying to find it real quick, the link, but I can't remember. I want to say, wasn't it like 80% were not having babies?
From 20 to 29, it was 95%, which was shocking. And then from 30 to 39 was 80%.
Yeah, and that goes to exactly what I was talking about earlier, where 20 to 29, it's what was the percentage?
It was like 95 are not having children.
Yeah, I mean that's nuts.
I know.
Like the 20s and 30s, especially early 30s, are the prime time to have children. And I can't forget what the age is. My wife knows it for sure, but there's I think it's 35. After 35, it's considered a geriatric pregnancy, and so even science backs up that women ought to be having babies early and not later. And they're not they're not being pushed to do so, and so they're putting career ahead of that. They're putting college ahead of it, then they're putting career ahead of it, and and not only that, but women are walking away from the church as well. I mean, I think that there's an inordinate amount of women. I know, in our own church, and this is a limited, very limited sample of things, but we definitely have, I think we have more guys that are there than we do, available ladies. So, we can't, even in that situation, the ladies are not showing up and they're not staying. Now that doesn't mean every church is that way. I mean, that's a limited sample size that I'm dealing with, but I think that's what I'm hearing is happening everywhere, is that women are kind of withdrawing that way. And I think there was a poll that I even used in maybe a sermon that showed that showed it's actually flipped, that more men are going to church. More men tend to be conservative than the women. And so it's actually flipped, and there's not as many are available. So if you're a young conservative believer, finding a wife is going to be very difficult at best.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. Like, what would let's say a 23-year-old single conservative guy, Christian, hopefully he goes to a church where there's other conservative women, girls. But if not, then how the odds of you finding someone that matches up with you that way is virtually zero now. Like,
yeah, it's interesting. I had this conversation with one of our listeners, and I was asking him his opinion on how to find a wife, how these young guys could find a wife. And he said that he actually went to I'm not suggesting people do this, but he actually went to a weaker church, and I won't say who it is. So the person I know they're a listener, and I know that they'll know who I'm talking about. But I think he said he went to a Canvas in Alachua, and that's where he met his wife. And so I do think that when I tell you that because I was actually asking him about what he thought about the dating apps. So the Christian Mingle or there's several of them that are out there. And I used to be against them. I really did. And I definitely see the dangers of it. But I know that there are several guys in our church, like that have been in our church or are in our church that met through dating apps. And, and I think that that's possibly at this point because it's so difficult to find like-minded believing women. I think at this point, I would argue that I think if I were in that position, I would be doing something proactive. I would be either on a dating app or or I would be going to a church that had women to be able to meet, and I know, that's what I would be doing. And I don't want to lose definitely don't want to lose our single men. So I would probably tell them to do the dating app. But if they did the dating app, I think they need to be shepherded through it. Like, I don't think we should, as a church, just kind of step back, because there are some issues in how the algorithms work, and they match you up based on interests. And sometimes it doesn't, the algorithm doesn't understand the nuance of things. And so you can get someone who you're compatible with in a certain way, but you're not really compatible with them. I saw that with one couple. Thankfully, they've been able to work it through, but there was an incompatibility because of their families and because of their background. But the algorithm of the dating app didn't see that or understand that. And so that's something that you have to be shepherded through. You need to be shepherded through. But today, I think it is such that to find a wife, you have to be aggressive to do it. And I think some of these guys are way too passive.
So are apps kind of the way to go, would you say?
Well,
or go to a liberal
I would just
church?
go as far as to say, I used to be against them because of the trouble, because of what I'm talking about with the algorithm. At this point, things have become so dire that I would say that is a possibility for guys that they ought to consider. They definitely need to be proactive in finding a wife. They have to be proactive. If they're just sitting back waiting on that wife to come, it can happen. It does happen, but and I'm not impugning on the sovereignty of God, because God will bring you the wife that He wants you to have. But I mean, there is a human responsibility to actually go out and look for a wife. I mean, and I think we're to the point where the dating apps are a possible way to find someone who is like-minded.
Yeah. I used to be against them, but I don't know. I'm kind of, the way you look at these charts, I saw a chart where it talked about women and men. It showed how they've gone politically, and the men have kind of stayed conservative. It fluctuates just a little bit, but they've stayed steady. But women have gone up, to liberal more and more quickly, and it keeps rising. So I'm thinking if it keeps going, I mean, there's going to be, I think we've talked about this. We have race wars going on almost right now. We have, people not getting along because you're a different color. We have, Republican Democrats at war with each other. They don't like each other. And now we're going to have men and women at war with each other, which is not what God intended at all. And so it's to find a conservative girl, like your two daughters were scarfed up pretty quick. So, I mean, I don't know, the good conservative women are out there, but boy, you got to really look and pray to find them.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, my daughters both found husbands, that seem to love the Lord. And so I'm thankful for them and thankful for the husbands they found. I, definitely pray for my boys that they would find women who love the Lord. And so, I don't know. I think that I feel bad. I feel terrible for young men who are in that position.
So do you think marriage is in trouble, like worldwide? Are people going to stop getting married eventually?
Yeah, it's interesting because the divorce rates have fallen. So the people who are getting married are getting divorced less and less. But the number of people who are actually staying single, I think, is rising. And that's certainly problematic. And thankfully, what's interesting about the whole dynamic is that, the secular worldview, people who have a secular worldview are not getting married and they're not having children. And those who have a biblical worldview are getting married still and having children. And so ultimately, the secular worldview can't stand in that, it has to fall. I mean, because it's not renewing itself. The only thing that they can do is cannibalize our children. Like, I mean, I don't mean to actually eat them, but figuratively eat them and take them from us, and that's what they're doing, because many Christians are sending their kids to public school and to the universities without having any actual defense. They're not, without teaching them theology and a biblical worldview. They're sending them to these colleges and universities, and they're getting eaten up by the Democrats, by the by the left. And so I say Democrat. It's not really a Democrat Republican issue. It's really more of a worldview issue. A secular worldview versus a biblical worldview.
Yeah, I agree. We're talking about the spiritual state of women in our year 2026 and beyond, and it's just there's a odd spirit out there, and so I guess we can go down this road now. Do you think there is an evil spirit, like a divine feminine spirit that has been unleashed in the world, or has it always been here? Like, is it just something that you said started in the garden?
Well, I think it started in the garden, but the playbook hasn't changed, right? I mean, and Satan hasn't changed his playbook. He had the same playbook in the garden as he has today. So yeah, I would definitely. I mean, I think you're speaking of a podcaster that you and I both have listened to. The divine, he defines it as the divine feminine, and this feminine spirit, and we see that in the culture. Men are becoming less masculine by and large. Women are becoming, the feminism has been rising for many years, and I think we're kind of seeing the crescendo of that and the effects of that right now. And I think it's reflected in the birth rates that we just talked about there in Canada, but I think those are reflected by and large in all of the Western nations, that that people are not reproducing like they need to, and the birth rates have fallen such that we're not replacing those who pass away, and so we're not at replacement rates, and so yeah, I mean, I think it is problematic, and I think that we as Christians, we need to see this and be fighting, for what's right and what's good. And it starts with our families. Like, if you have children, you need to be teaching them a biblical understanding of the world. If you have daughters, especially, you should be teaching them that it's right and good to get married and have babies, that it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And you're not less than if you do that. And as a matter of fact, it's the most noble thing you can do as a woman, is get married and have children and raise children and do this. Paul talks about it as even in terms of redemption, and that there's a certain level of redemption that occurs by being that woman who raises children, godly children, to come to know and love the world, or the Lord, and are then going to be raising other godly children. And so we as Christians need to be focused on, if we have a family, raising a godly family, raising them in a godly way, teaching them. If we don't have a family, we need to be supporting those families that do, right? That we need to be helping. I love the fact that, we have a young family, and you and your wife pour into them, and, you treat those kids almost like they're your grandkids. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's good, it's right and good for that to happen.
Do you think this kind of what we're just talking about, what you just said, answered one of my questions I didn't even ask you? You answered it, which is great. Is how has God designed women? What is their purpose? Is that kind of outdated? Like, has our society evolved to the point where this is no longer sustainable, because women are all going to college, they want a career, but some of them, I think, want a career and a family, but some of them just want a career and no family. So how does the church not look like we are dinosaurs? Or are we just always going to look that way, like this is God's way does not change? So how do we...
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to be out of step with the world. And if we're standing on biblical truth, we're going to be out of step with the world. And even if there's a period or in a way that we are in step with the world, it just wait a little bit and you won't be in step with the world anymore, because the world's going to move to something else. And so I think that we're always going to be kind of the odd guys out, so to speak, as Christians. That we're always going to have someone who we're always going to be on an island of our own, or we're always going to be on a path that's isolated from the rest of the world. And not only that, I mean, in terms of right or left, whether, if you're on the biblical path, you're not on a worldly path, there's going to be people to your right or your left that you can't stand with, because they're not for biblical truth.
Yeah, and we're not saying that like a woman can't be a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that, but it needs to be somehow absorbed into making the family work first, and then like we always say, when the kids are out of the nest, then yes, you're doing that. But I mean, we've seen women who are great mothers and also maybe are a doctor or something. It is hard, but I think you can make it work. And then, as you grow older and your kids are able to take care of themselves, you can spend more time maybe in your profession as it is. But again, we would say there's nothing wrong with being a housewife either.
Yeah. Well, there's everything right about it, actually.
Right.
Not even that there's nothing wrong with it. There's everything right about it. And yeah, it could be a season. I mean, both my daughters have, they have college. Well, my older daughter has a teaching degree, and my younger daughter will have a nursing degree she'll be an RN here this summer. Both are married. I don't know in terms of kids what the Lord has in store that way, but my own wife, she was working in a career when I met her, and she stayed in that career for probably 2 to 3 years. I can't remember exactly, but 2 to 3 years she was working. When we first got married, after we had our first child, we actually put him in daycare, which is not what we should have done in hindsight. But we ultimately came to the point of realizing that she needed to stay home. And thankfully, I had a good enough job that we could do it. And so we just trusted the Lord, and that's what we did. And He just has sustained us from that point forward. We've always had plenty. That we've never lacked for anything, and the Lord has blessed it. But then as the children got older, Angie went back to work, and when they were in high school, she actually worked in the high school where they were at. She worked at SCCS in California, and she worked at FCA here in High Springs. And so we needed that money at that time, because as your kids get older, it becomes more and more expensive. I hate to let the cat out of the bag for people who have young families, that it only gets harder. You only need more money to make it work. But it we needed that money, but she still tried to do something that was in touch with the kids, where we tried to put them in positions where we still had more influence on them than others. And so we didn't shirk that responsibility. And were we perfect? No, but we didn't. And and now my wife works. I mean, our kids are completely grown, and 3 of the 4 are out of our house, and the one that's not is he's still grown, and he's just kind of working through some things. And so he's still here, but she's back at work, and she's working in a career at this point, and that's okay, because she's raised our kids, and she still has time for them on the weekends and in the evenings, and she still makes time for them. She makes time for the family, and she puts family first. And if it ever came down to her job or her family, I'm persuaded that she would choose her family over the job.
I just want to, as we are talking again about the spiritual state of women in our world today, well, how does the Bible define the fact that we have so many women that want to lead? Are women designed to lead, or are they designed, this probably get me in trouble, to submit and be a helpmate? How would you word that without?
Well, that's biblical. That because that God created them to be a suitable helpmate. That God expects women to submit to their husband as unto the Lord. So it's biblical that would be what would happen. When you look at the curse, that he cursed childbirth, and so he said that they would be in pain and bringing forth children. But he also says that her desire will be for her husband. And a lot of theologians would say, and I think I agree with them, that desire is more of a desire to dominate. And so they have a fleshly desire because of the fall. They have a fleshly desire to dominate, to lead. But that's not the biblical worldview. I mean, that's the biblical worldview would be being a suitable helpmate and submitting as unto the Lord. And that doesn't mean that, again, does that mean that they're less than the man? No, both are the woman and the man are made in the image of God. Both have a mandate to rule and be stewards over creation. Both of them have a moral responsibility before God, but they have distinct roles. I mean, there's a distinction. It's not inequality. They're ontologically they're the same, and that they're both made in the image of God. They're both joint heirs of the faith, I think is how Peter puts it. And so yeah, I think that because of the fall, that women have a desire to lead, a fleshly desire to lead, and men have a fleshly desire to be passive, and we have to fight against that.
Yeah, because when you look at a lot of the Black Lives Matter, those were 3 women that led that movement. We're seeing again in the anti-ICE movement, a lot of women leading that. There was a woman who led the protest into a church, in that St. Paul church called City Church. That was a woman who led that protest. I mean, so women are stepping up and taking the reins of these things. And we've talked about this before in a former podcast. A lot of police chiefs and mayors and fire chiefs and all these are now women. Women are taking the roles that men in the past have all taken, and now women are starting to dominate that. You can have a city where you'll have a woman mayor, a woman police chief, and a woman fire chief, and we see that in California, I think, and it's in Los Angeles, and it's not doesn't work as well. And I think there is a verse in Isaiah that when God is speaking to the nation of Israel, that this is a show of you are in incredibly big decline when women are leading you and children are leading you. And so I think what we're talking about is this spirit, I guess some people call it a Jezebel spirit, divine feminine. There's a spirit of rebellion against the way God has ordained things, the way God has ordered them. And I think we're just seeing that increasing quickly. I want to say exponentially, but I can't say it, gaining speed as we go forward.
Yeah. I mean, you said it, and it's true. I think I think we're reaping, it's interesting. We were talking about elections and women. It's interesting that I don't think there would be I don't think there would have ever been a left victory outside of the women vote. That men always vote by and large conservative, and in terms of the majority. So if it was just men, we would have conservative, officials, and so women tend to skew that the other direction, and we see that with the Democratic Party because they really focus on the women's quote unquote issues, and they champion feminism, they champion abortion, so that and we haven't even talked about that, but that's another aspect of this, that with the birth control pill and then making abortion available, that's allowed women to be freed up from this responsibility to they can still go out quote unquote and enjoy themselves and do what men do, sleep around or whatever, and they don't have the consequences because of the pill or because of abortion or because of the morning after pill that's out there right now. And I think what we're seeing that we're reaping the benefits reaping the consequences, not benefits, reaping the consequences of what's happened, with the women vote, and then all how it's progressed. And so it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, I would definitely sound old to say that women shouldn't be voting, and so I do think that that a family vote might be the better way to go, that the head of the household votes for the family. And so, but I don't know. I mean, that's a big subject. So
doesn't Doug Wilson believe that? I think he was the one that kind of thought about that.
Yeah, there's Doug Wilson, that orbit, believe that. We have some people in our church that think that as well. So it's not an unheard of understanding that women shouldn't be voting. So
And we sound out of step with the world, but the Bible is out of step with the world. So people might be shocked at some of the things we're saying, but we're just trying to be biblical, right? We're bringing the truth of God's word.
The Bible says it, right? This is what the Bible says, and this is what we're seeing lived out, right? We're not making this stuff up. I mean, this is what's really happening in the world. And so, do we sound like we're out of step? Yeah, probably so. And I think I'm okay with that. I think I know I'm okay with that because I want to be biblical, and I want to think through things biblically. And so, I don't want to be influenced by the world in how I think, in either direction. So.
Yeah, I mean, we see from Scripture, Ecclesiastes, say there's nothing new under the sun. So things that we're talking about, it's nothing new. This spirit has been going on for a long time. But I think people might, if they're listening to us and don't know us, they might have thought we came from a time machine back in the 1700s, and now we transported here, and we're talking about things like, housewives and all these things, which is, a housewife is kind of it's like an endangered species. You barely see them anymore. But I think that was, when I grew up, my mom stayed home. I don't know, your mom might have too as well, but that's how it was back in the day. But now it's a rare thing. And
yeah, I mean, my mom worked when I was very young, but she ultimately stayed home and, took care of the family, took care of the kids. And so, I was raised with a father who worked and a mother who stayed at home. But it was easier back then. I think my dad made, like $13 an hour back in the day, and that could support a family. I mean, we didn't have a lot, but it could, if you're careful with it, it could support a family. Now, $13 an hour wouldn't even support one person by themselves. And so, that even $20 an hour doesn't do it. And so what happens is that in order for people to survive and have the things that they think they should have, they feel like they need two incomes. And and it's a thing called the DINKS, dual income, no kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have these people that are getting married, they're teaming up and they're both working, they both are pursuing a career, but they're enjoying that dual income, but they don't have any kids. And it's sad. I mean, some people can't have kids, some people can't have kids, right? But for someone who can, and they choose not to because they want to put career and money ahead of that's wrong. But the way the world is set up now, it's very difficult for someone, like my daughters, if they decide, that they're going to have kids and stay at home, it's very difficult for there to be enough money to make ends meet. And it almost impossible. It's not, and it's, the gap is getting bigger than it was when I was young and when you were young.
Absolutely. The spiritual state of women in our world today. And the reason why I think we can, if this is a court of law, we can say, here's our closing statement. I think what we're seeing is women are wired to have empathy, which is a good thing. But I think there's also a divine feminine, which is an evil spirit that has taken shape to form that, because all you have to do is look at abortion. Women should have empathy for that. There's a child that's life is being taken. They don't care. If it's an illegal immigrant who's a child molester or, sex trafficker, they rescue him. So what does that tell you? I mean, that's kind of like, case closed, Your Honor.
Sure. We're not in a good place when it comes to those things and what's going on.
So I know you're not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but where is this all leading? I always ask you those questions and you go,
every time you ask me to get it wrong.
Well, we'll just do the opposite of what you said then. In 2028, we have this divine feminine. Will this spirit kind of carry over, and will we have a Democratic woman president in 2028?
I don't know, but it's possible. It's I will say when the rubber band snaps back, it's going to snap back with a vengeance. And so, if I don't know what's going to happen, and we'll see. I think we may get a little bit of an idea at the midterms what happens, if there's going to be this wave of blue that overtakes the red. And Yeah, I mean, we very well could see a big problem in 2028, but I'm not. I'm not I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. And every time I try to prophesy in any way, I end up being wrong. So whatever I say, just think the opposite, and it's probably true.
I love to watch you go out on the limb, like you're way out there, and I'm like, "Hey, are you okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm good." But no, I think sometimes you have to just to think you're thinking about what's going ahead. Sometimes you are out on a limb, but sometimes you're right, and so it makes you, you're
Yeah.
thinking through things, and you were right about a lot of things, with Trump, but I'm just thinking as we look forward, I don't see this spirit diminishing.
I'm the guy. I'm always out on a limb, but I also have the saw in my hand cutting off the limb that I'm sitting on. So it's not good. Although there are the cartoons. You remember the cartoons where they,
Yes.
somebody would cutting the limb and a tree would fall.
Yep.
So,
That's like a Bugs
so
Bunny.
maybe-
Yeah, so ma'am, all we can do is look at the trends and look at the Bible and kind of say, okay, I don't think this is going anywhere. We wish it would. We pray for more common sense. I think that would be a great thing to have. But again, when we live in this world, and we've talked about this, we have AI now, so you can manipulate images. And I think it was CNN or one of them took this picture of the guy, Preddy, and made him look more attractive so people would be more sympathetic to him. And I think these things they're all to manipulate us
Sure.
into feeling a certain way.
Yeah, I had a family member who posted a picture of Melania Trump with a pornographic actor, and it ended up, you do the research, it's AI. It was AI generated. No, it didn't happen. And so like she was buddy right, with this pornographic actor, and it wasn't true. And we live in a world at this point, kind of getting on a different subject, but we live in a world at this point that it's hard to know what's true and what isn't.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah.
It's becoming more and more difficult to be discerning of the truth.
Yeah. And as we end today, I think we would both agree that how God has designed women and their purpose is the best way to go. And I don't think any of this is really shocking that we're seeing a rebellion against what God has designed, because it seems like everything God has designed is being rebelled against.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, God's design absolutely is being rebelled against in every way. And we see that in homosexuality. We see that, now there's a group of Christians who are coming out and wanting to make it illegal to be married as homosexuals. And I think that's right. And that's good. And I think we need to be fighting for those things, even though we know ultimately, my eschatology says ultimately it's going to proceed from bad to worse, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be fighting. That doesn't mean that we just lay down and that we just kind of let it go. And, it sort of this idea of it's self-defeating anyway. So why even pick up our sword and fight? But I think we are to take up the sword of truth, and we are to, speak to these things and fight in that way. I mean, it's obviously, the Lord is fighting for us, right? And ultimately the Lord's going to return, and he's going to be the one who has victory. It's going to be all his, and we're going to worship him for it. So
preach it. Yeah, I agree. And I think what we also would ask you to do is every time there's a news story, just give it, we always say the 48-hour rule is kind of before you jump to conclusions.
Yeah, even on Fresh Bread, we don't tend to talk about things until they're kind of more mature. We tend to we're not hot off the presses kind of guys, and I don't want to be, because I want to kind of watch things develop and comment once I fully understand what's going on. Even you brought up the guy Preddy who died. We're learning more and more about that situation. So if we jumped on right when it happened, we would have less information, wouldn't know all these things, that we'd be potentially making things up. Whereas we like to be guys that sit back and watch and observe and think through and then address it later. than the rest. We're not trying to be on the cutting edge, so to speak.
Absolutely. Truth is truth. And if you're a law enforcement guy and you do something wrong, you should pay for that. And if you're a criminal and you do something wrong, you should pay for that. So yeah, there has to be right and wrong, and not everyone on this side is right and this side's wrong all the time. We are human beings. You said it yourself, right? You, as a parent, you were not perfect. I don't think anybody's perfect. There's no perfect person except our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who was perfect. But we are all going to say something to offend somebody. We're going to do something to offend somebody. Even driving, you're going to offend somebody, because I know you've offended me many times. But yeah, it happens. And so I think we just have to be truth and love. I think that's the key.
Yeah. I think I'd offend my wife too, because I stay in the doghouse. But
yeah, you have a nice one though. I like that. You got air conditioning.
Nice.
And got a nice hammock in there. I like it.
Yeah, good stuff.
You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.